Welcome to the top business interviews in Japan. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan, and I have a very special guest today, the country manager for Curvature, Kervin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me here.
Yeah, no, thank you for hosting us in your office. It's great to be here. So we're talking about leadership, but before we get into that, can you introduce yourself a little bit, maybe about what you've done in your background, in your business career, and a little bit about what Curvature does, because a lot of people may not know the name.
So I'll start off with how I came to Japan. So I'm originally from the Philippines. So after graduating the university, as a Filipino, I think we have very strong ties to the U.S. And one of the success factor or dreams of any graduate is to work overseas, work in a multinational company, or run your own business. For me, looking for an opportunity in the U.S. wasn't there, and fortunately, there was an opportunity in Japan that allowed me to come here. So that sort of like was my first entry point to Japan. Before that, Japan wasn't really a big influence in my childhood, Sony, the brand, sushi, but beyond that, it wasn't a big thing in the Philippines. Now it's different, right, with the internet and everything. So I came to Japan in 1990 as a programmer. And that's sort of my first entry into the working world. Then I moved to Tokyo and work as a systems engineer and working in a Japanese company, in a pure Japanese company, where I was the first foreign national in that company.
How did you get a job in Japan from the Philippines?
So it was through a job posting in the newspaper. Yeah. So they were looking for 10 graduates, and this company was trying to hire programmers from all over. So they had posted jobs in China, in Hong Kong, even in Thailand and Russia. It's a Japanese company, and they wanted to find overseas talent and put them in Nagasaki, in Kyushu, because the cost of living is much lower. And they also wanted to, the founder was from Nagasaki, so he actually wanted to hire the local talents who doesn't want to come to Tokyo, but give them the same pay as Tokyo in southern Japan. So it was sort of like a software development center.
So the Kyushu, Nagasaki period of time, how long were you there?
I was there for 2 years. And I think, 1990 was sort of like just after the bubble. So, but it wasn't Tokyo, so we didn't really see what the bubble is. So, but being in Kyushu, I think that sort of really was a blessing in disguise, because if you're in Kyushu, the amount of people who speaks English is definitely way less. Japan is already lacking in linguist skills, but even in Kyushu, it's even less. So the environment forced you to adapt to the culture, to the language. And I think that was the biggest factor for me in my growth in Japan, working for a Japanese company, because they don't see you as a foreigner. They see you as somebody, then you have to become up par with even the local Japanese staff.
So after those 2 years in Kyushu, what happened then?
So after 2 years, I decided to find an opportunity in Tokyo. And during that time, I was taking my Japanese proficiency tests. So in Kyushu, you can only take it in one area, which is in Kyushu University. So you go all the way to Hakata for that via the bullet train or the train. And on the train stands, they were selling Tech Bing, which is a magazine done by Recruit, where you find job. Internet wasn't there yet, so it was all paper. So this Tech Bing actually was a magazine like maybe around 400 yen, where it has placements. And at the back, it has postcards, prepaid, where you sign up your name and say you're interested and see how it goes. And it's a numbers game. So you get all these, so you send out these, and I got two replies. One was an ANA software company in Osaka, and another company in Tokyo where they just had a sort of restructuring of where they had a fallout between directors, where the company split. But because of the project that the company had to do, they were immediately trying to hire, needed, there was a necessity to hire people. So sort of like my card coming into there was a very timely, thing. And the HR manager over there had a different mentality. So his name was Adachi-san. So he said like, yeah, I think it's time to hire people. He persuaded the CEO, look, this guy, we should interview him. So my interview with that company happened on a Christmas day. So I can recall this because of the dates, like it's in Christmas and all these. So, and that sort of like paved my way to Tokyo. But it was in Yokohama though. The company was in Yokohama.
And the job was?
As a system engineer, programmer too. So yeah, and as a career, I was around 24 at that time. I've worked there for 4 years, and I had a belief like when you're reaching 30, your programming skill set becomes a bit dull because you don't think as new anymore. So I think sales was sort of the next frontier for me, and I was recruited into Cisco then. But before I was recruited, I never thought of changing jobs because working in a Japanese company, and I was often tell a lot of people like, you get work off very, very much, such that your weekends, you're like either working or you're very tired. You don't have even time to look at other things. And during at that time, there's no internet, right? So the only media is like the newspaper, the TV media, and friends. So I was actually recruited by because we had a competing product, and so that's why I was recruited into Cisco for sales at that time. Other than that, I probably would have ended working in the same Japanese company if that didn't happen though.
And how long were you at Cisco?
I was in Cisco in Japan for 5 years, and I was the first non-expat foreigner there. So, well, I'll correct myself. There were two people who joined that day, me and another English guy. So we were the first. And Cisco at that time was facing a lot of big growth in Japan as the internet just started. Japan is just starting to adopt the internet. And the biggest driver for that was the universities. The universities decided to connect all their campus plus other campus so that they can exchange information similar to what Stanford did. And Cisco grew out of Stanford, right? So then Murai Jun, who's a very famous professor, he was the one who sort of was the driving force for that, and that obviously demanded a very high reason to acquire equipment that provided growth for Cisco. So Cisco was really growing very fast at that time. But my experience with Cisco was my first stage into, I would say, the real world, because working in a Japanese company and a foreign company, it's a bit different, where Japanese companies is you're judged based on not performance, but you're judged based on the group performance, whereas as a foreign entity, your individual performance obviously counts. The group performance obviously adds, but individually you add to the group performance. So I think working in both type of environment, you get to see both worlds, best of both worlds, where Japanese companies are very good in structured, in meetings, in scheduling and everything. So in education and training, I think those are good fundamentals to start with. And every time I meet somebody who's new to Japan or who's been here, I think my first ask for them is, did you work for a Japanese company immediately or a foreign company? And you can tell based on their language skill set or what type of company they are, you can see where their upbringing, if it's not the right word for their like career. Yeah.
And what happened after Cisco?
So Cisco, although I've said it's a foreign company, it's run very locally too. It's all Japanese executive at that time. So, but I worked there for 5 years, and I was at a point where I wanted to do more Asian work because being Asia, uh, I wanted to do work in Japan and outside of Japan. Where I did some work outside of Japan, but I wanted to do work. So I sort of, the internet was there. I found an opportunity working for a company for a UK. The company's called Orchestream. It was in the related field, but more on the network software, where it was looking for a sales director for Japan and Korea. So I thought that would be something that I can add value. Although Korea is something that I don't have any experience, they were looking for somebody to start from zero. So no headcounts in Asia, and they were looking to have somebody in Japan and for Korea and Japan, somebody in South Asia, somebody in North Asia, in Hong Kong, China. So that was sort of the growth.
And how long were you there?
I was there for around 12, 14 months. So it's a funny story because the company went bust. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but again, I think things happen for a cause. So I think it's a good sort of like opportunity for me to find that company to get myself exposed outside of Cisco. And I believe like if you've been working in a company for between 5 and 10 years, it becomes a bit dull, where coming to work is just an everyday thing. So I think some excitement is always good. So, but and then going back to that company, yes, it did end up very bad, but it allowed me to work as an individual contributor and with a startup, and we're doing zero cold call finding, like really calling not only Japanese company on a foreign country to foreign people who may not understand English. So that was a very good exposure for me. And that's helped me open my eyes. Like I wanted to do more work in Asia. So I ended up jumping a few jobs, but I ended up working for the competitor of Orchestream that allowed me to work in Hong Kong. So being an Asian, I wanted to do more, understanding more of the industry, the market, not only in Japan, but outside. So, and at that time, the telecom and the mobile space was starting to, the telecom is definitely a big space at that time, but the mobile was sort of like really starting to come out. And so I was very fortunate to be able to be in that industry where I was working, selling into the carriers in Singapore, visiting customers in Malaysia, like Telecom Malaysia, Celcom, Thailand. Although, but Asia, English is sort of really a more common language. I did some business too in China. So my background is, if the people can see my face, I'm Asian, but it's Chinese. So I have a Chinese background. But my Chinese, I can speak, but for business, it's not enough. So when I did business in China, I can communicate, but I don't think it's enough for proper business. But I feel like China is a different beast of doing business. There's a lot of relationship, there's a lot of history, and a lot of middle person. And you don't get to the middle person without history. So it's a very hard for somebody new to come into that market, and that's what I felt. And after doing some business there, I've sort of like stayed away of doing roles where it has to be with China, although it's probably the biggest market in the next 20, 30 years. Again, when I feel like I have to do work, I need to know that I can bring value. And that's really where that gives me the enjoyment of doing work, because you're helping not only the customer, you're helping the company, and at the end of the day, you're rewarded with something. It could be monetary reward, it could be like you feel like good that you're doing something good. or you feel good that you're moving up. Uh, so when I was in Hong Kong, and I'll go around, Curvature at that time sort of found me through a customer that I was dealing with. And when they called me up, I asked them, so what does Curvature do? They were then called Network Hardware Resale. So their previous name was called Network Hardware NHR. So they said, we're selling refurbished Cisco, and we're trying to get into Asia. We're starting our office in Singapore, and we're looking for somebody for Japan. And the reason why they reached out to me because of my Cisco background, and there was a 6-year gap, so that was around 2007. I never thought that there was an industry like that, a secondary market industry. And I said, you're gonna make a lot of money in Japan, because the way the Japanese do business, there's a lot of middle person, and your business model is you're cutting out the middle person and bringing that value to the end user. There's a lot of potential there, and I've been with the company 12 years. And in 2015, so we opened our office here in 2013. I wasn't prepared yet to come back. The funny thing is the CEO asked me around 2014, and in any company, the CEO is the best salesperson in the company. So he knew what buttons to push and what. And he asked me very nicely, he goes, I think it's time for you to go back. What do you think? And working for the company at that time for 8 years, I think it was a good time for me to repay the company and add my value. So at that time, I was an individual contributor. But he wanted me to lead the company here because I've been with the company longer. We're hiring people. The training knowledge is very hard to train remotely, languages. So I thought that was a good step for me. And it was a very good opportunity for me to be in the management role. We're growing very fast. The market we're in is something that's very unique. It's the leader in the industry, and it's not yet really a known big industry in Japan. The sort of the third-party maintenance that we are a big part of right now.
And talking about leading teams, what did you find was challenging about being a leader in Japan? You'd worked as an employee of a number of companies, and then you pop back from Hong Kong. Suddenly, you're the boss. You've got to lead people. What did you find was challenging?
One thing being a leader, it's very easy to just enjoy the role of. You think you have that hammer. It's very easy to do that, and I think the inner pride sometimes gets over you, and it does happen to myself. I'm not an exception for that, and that's why I like to meet other leaders, because you see the humility, and that's something it's very hard to learn. Everybody has that, and if you see other people with that humility, then you can sort of like bring it back out. I think that's always a good reminder. So that's one. I think humility is very important, because the pride, the status, it's all, in any place. But here in Japan, what my experience is having to manage people is like having an extended family, having a lot of different children where you inherit their pain, their growing pains. I have a lot of white hair because of these. They don't consult with you with personal problem, but it's just a lot of different things, and a lot of times you have to know how to read certain employees, and there are some employees who think the leader's job is to help them solve what their issue is, and other people feel like a leader is sort of like a mentor, So when I was in Singapore, Curvature was a very big proponent of training. So we actually went to a lot of like, not sales training, but sort of management training and different type of selling. In the 90s, you had tasks, which is very popular. It's probably not used anymore, but the leadership then was a very big proponent of that. And So that sort of helps me in a way, but still there's always a lot of room for growth for that. And communication is probably the most important thing, because communication is not only just asking, but making a way where your employees can access you easy. So I always leave my door open though, even when I have something that I don't want to be bothered, because when the door is closed, a lot of time certain Japanese employees who've never worked in a foreign country think that they cannot talk to their manager's manager. I think that's not the case in our company, and that should not be the case for any company. I think when I can remember when I was in a Japanese company, the youngest in the company, it's very hard. You get nervous when you're talking to the CEO or the president of the company, because he's the big boss, right? But I think it should not be the case, and those are the type of people where you learn most. You pick a little bit of everything from them.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Well, think about most of those things we would say are general principles of leadership. But what about Japan particularly? What things did you find were needed to be a good leader in Japan?
In Japan, the leadership is, I think it starts from within the company. So human resource is definitely always a big topic, because it's always evolving right now. So that's always something that I think any company in Japan that has a good human resource team can definitely sort of be a good success. In fact, sales, that's sort of given. It has to be. But I think the human resource is good, and the culture that you build within the company is very important too. Like the work hard, play hard type is sort of an old phrase right now. For me, for us in the current company with Curvature, I think I like to use the word life-work balance, because people have families, people have their own family, extended family right now. So those are very important in their life, and having those problems, it affects their own personal success too. So I think being able to understand, making sure those come first, the employees, come first, is very important. And with Japan recently, we've been very unfortunate to get hit with a lot of weather disasters. So I think those kind of things where we need to react as a leader, saying, okay, if there's a big snow or outage, how do we make our employees' welfare be good? Do we ask them not to come to work? I think those are the decisions that we have to make within. And being a GM or a country manager for Japan, sometimes you need to ask corporate. But for me, I think as a leader, sometimes you may make the wrong decision, but you have to, pull the trigger. It's a very bad experience, but you have to make the decision at that to ensure that the well-being of the employees are number one.
So, in many big companies' cases, when they're doing engagement surveys of the team, in my experience, it's usually been in some sort of hub like Singapore or Hong Kong, and they're going through all the results for the world. APAC, always lowest engagement scores. And of course, inside APAC, Japan, the lowest engagement scores. And the people who are sitting outside of Japan are like, what are you guys doing in Japan? You better fix that. Those scores are no good. Japanese obviously are not engaged. What's been your experience about getting Japanese engaged, and what have been the scores like? If you Curvature actually has that system or not, I don't know. But what has it been like, and how do you get people engaged?
The 360 type performance evaluation and the customer sat is the same. And most recently, we started doing that with customers too. And I was talking to our head of customer service delivery, and his background, he's been with customer service delivery, and he basically say the same thing. In Japan, they'll always be very low. And obviously, as somebody here, you'll try to tell corporate that. Whether they accept it or not, it's different though. And how do you get that engaged is really, I guess it comes to scale too, because if you can do it one-on-one, but it doesn't scale. And so if you do one-on-one, you'll probably get not a better result, but you get more. You say the intention of this is to gauge how we're performing, and there's an objective here. It's not very efficient because it takes a longer time.
How many people are in Curvature?
We have around 22.
22, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we're doing it within internally and within our clients, so it could be a few hundred, and that can take time. So, and I think these type of evaluation has been not very popular or not a common thing done in Japan, whereas people would think it's something that it's not my work. It's something that it's more work for me to do. So there's no really preset expectation set to the people who are doing it or doing it for those. So we haven't found the right formula yet, but what we've done is really more on picking up certain, for example, for our clients, we make sure that there's a pre-scheduled, to say we're gonna do this, so that the customer's aware of that. And the good thing about Japan is if they're made aware, then they know how to react. If they just get suddenly some letter or saying, okay, how was this service? Then they may do it or they may not, or they just tick the most common things. So I think that's what a common reaction would be done. Internally, what we've done is we've sort of made it not public, but we've said, okay, certain people, certain managers, you still haven't finished it, so that you need to make sure it's done. So it's forced. So we make, and because we're still small, it's still easy to enforce it though. So that's sort of like what we've done. But that's sort of like, it's not a headache, but that's always an issue during the year end, which is right now, because our fiscal year ends in December. So that's something that we're also running into right now.
Engagement often is related back to culture, and you talked before about culture in organisations. What sort of culture are you trying to create here, and how successful have you been in creating that?
Culture is something that you can't force on people, but the way we're sort of my way of thinking that is, you think about company first, employee second, customer. So we sort of like have that mentality where when we're making decisions, is that good for the company? Is that good for the employee? And obviously it's good for the customer. Those are basically decision points. If one of them is no, then that tells you, this could be something that's not good. So we've sort of like used that as a mantra for us internally. It's not a mission statement, but sort of something that we've used. Obviously, like, do you put company first, employees first, or customers first? There's, but you can't have three first because it doesn't really make sense. But we sort of do that. That's one way we put that for the work culture. And I think for the environment, we're very fortunate here because we have a very open type working environment. So there's no booth, everybody's open space. We have a pantry where people have lunch together, where there's more communicating outside of work. So you have different groups who can communicate, who will be able to communicate outside of their working group. Because in companies, the tendency is the same group of people would tend to stay together, and we try to avoid that. Sports is a very good activity because um, it's always a good way to engage because you don't talk about work and you have a different objective. The goal is to score better, or win something. So that's always we do a 2 year event here. One is a bowling tournament, and so that's always been a very fun event where we get people to come here. Mm. Uh, Before we used to do a happy hour a lot, and then I found out that in our bylaws we can't have alcohol in the office, so we sort of stopped that. Then.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so just to be safe. Yeah, but before we used to do a happy hour every Friday, around 4 or 5. And we have a good view of the Tokyo Bay over there, so it was a good way for people to say, "Hey, let's stop. It's Friday." But because we have a rule book that's alcohol's not allowed, so and we sort of like made that, we've stopped that right now. Mm.
So it sounds like you've got a fairly happy, cooperative culture here.
You know, um, I think Japanese people are mainly good people, and and here we're not only Japanese. We have uh, Asian, Chinese, Indonesians, Americans as well. So it's a big mix. Uh, I think there's mood swings sometimes, and there's always challenges in people. And if you have like more than two people, sometimes head will butt. So I'm not saying we have the perfect company, but I think it's like we have the right intention for that, and there's always growth to make it better. When we're looking at new people, we're always adding people. So we just added one person, and we're adding one more. So always new blood is always good, I think, for the company, because when there's new blood, there's always new idea, different people, and then there's more cohesiveness with the team, and people will start to talk as respect, the show of respect, and then suddenly, if somebody don't get along with others, that sort of like tends to go away. Mm.
I don't know if you can mention numbers or not. I don't know as a public company you can mention numbers or not, but in terms of results and growth, given the sort of culture you've created, how have the results been as a consequence?
In Japan, we've grown people-wise. When I came here, we were just under 7. So that was 2015. So we've grown 3-folds right now. We've had our bumps. We've hired people and we had to let people go. We'd hired people and people have chosen to leave. And I think that's fair. And I always tell my staff, I want to see them at least 3-4 years and move to the next ladder to become the next leader, because it's an opportunity. In terms of performance-wise, we've been growing at least 20-30% every year. So Japan is a very big market for IT. And the value that we bring to the customer is we are a customer where companies come to us when they're facing problems with finding ways to help maintain their IT equipment, where manufacturers have told them, we're not going to support your product. You have to either self-support it, which is probably not an option for them, or buy the new upgrade. So now comes Curvature, who's the leader in the US, where we have certain specialties. We don't do everything, but we have certain specialties where we can help customers save operational costs, could be 30-40%. And the biggest example of that is there's a public article with Japan Post where their CIO actually went public on using our service. So it's not their article. Their CEO wanted to save their costs for maintenance, and they were looking at different vendor and got our name through another customer's us, and we obviously look at the tender, and it's a public tender, so we fortunately won, and he made public that we helped them lower their costs up to 80% in that article, which is very powerful. And because of that, we've been getting a lot of inquiries from not only enterprise customers, but government agencies, because it's Japan Post Law. It's not a mom and pop, it's not a mom and pop shop. It's the one of the biggest companies or biggest establishment. And it's like sort of government too, though. So the value that we bring here is we're helping our customers know how to manage their IT lifecycle rather than have vendors dictate it. So it's not a rocket science, but nobody has yet figured it out in Japan. There are small companies that does it, but with a scale of like $500 million company worldwide, it's very, very few. And we are a global company, so we can help companies who said, we have offices in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in London, in Japan, or in New York, in Chicago, and can you help us on all these? And it's very, very hard. Unless you're looking for an HP or an IBM, then you're going to have a big cost to that. Yeah.
What about innovation? One of the things that I find in Japan is that mistakes are very much avoided. People are sticking to their comfort zone because they're scared of making mistakes. But the innovation process is messy, and there's bound to be mistakes if you're going to try and innovate. So there's sort of like a natural cultural preference not to innovate in a way, keep everything the same, where we know what it is, it's safe, it's good, I won't get into trouble. So how do you encourage people to innovate, given that's the cultural background here?
Well, with Curvature, we're a US-based company. So one of the biggest fault in many extension of foreign companies is you innovate based on the headquarters decision or strategy. And most of the time, those don't fit in Japan because of, it could be a language, it could be just the system would be different. So, and we have that issue too. But in Japan, we're given a bit of more freedom to make some of our own decision where, but there's a certain extent, obviously. So, for example, like in Japan for working, so we've actually implemented certain rules locally where we have a female employee who've given birth and first child. So instead of asking that person to come to work, we've asked the person to come to work once a week, and that's been never done within the company. So we try to do that just for, again, it's about the employee's welfare, and does it affect the company? Yes. If those are all yes, then that's one way of we're trying to do it. But there's a lot of still things for us to look at, like.
Well, so just on the case of that example, where did that idea come from?
This was from me.
Okay.
Because I don't have any children, but if I, as a parent, if I get a call from the nursery saying, please come home, that 30-minute or even 5-minute, I don't want to put myself in that situation though. So obviously, if I don't want that, I can't bear somebody else to do that though. So that's very easy for me to do, and I just have to sell it to my management. But it's something that I think I don't think your question was about innovation. I don't think it's innovation, but it's something that you have to do something different. Yeah.
So what about innovation for your team?
For us here,
do you have a process here for coming up with innovative ideas, or are you the source of all the innovative ideas?
Okay. In that sense, we do get a lot. We have a lot of salespeople who've been with us for 3-4 years, so they're more outspoken. So that's why there's idea from them who, with regards to internal processes, customer engagement, and what they'd like to see. So those ideas do come, and because we don't have any walls in our office, it's just a shout out. Say, what if we do this? It doesn't happen as much, but it happens where like we have a conversation and we just stand up and say, we do this. We don't do it over the happy hour, but we just do it over the course of the day, where we talk how about this process. We do get a a group where we don't talk about sales, but talk about, okay, there's a new process. What do you think? And I try to get their ideas because they're the ones doing it. Though. They're the ones in the field rather than me.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And so if you think about things that are different in Japan from a leader's point of view to, say, other countries, you've worked in other countries, you come from another country, the Philippines, right? So you see different styles of leadership. What are some of the things you've noticed about leading in Japan that are really specific to Japan that are different?
I think some very good leaders in Japan are also very good politicians. So they know what the right words to say, but it doesn't turn into action sometimes. So maybe that's not a good thing to say publicly, but that's how I feel, and I think so. I'm not that though, because I think I'm the opposite though. So I like to, when I say things, I want to execute them because they could be wrong, they could be right. So that's there's two sides in a coin. But I work with very good leaders in previous life where I've seen them, and they're good managers. They're very good. They're very good in the industry, but I see them as doing that, and that's sort of like a way to get around the stress of the middle management. So that's one way.
Is this type of tatemae and
Yes.
honne
Yes.
split of the perceived reality and the actual reality? Is that the difference?
Yes. I think that's important in a way, but that's important in a sense. But I think for me, it's all, sort of like BS. I'd rather cut the middle and make sure, because I think it's we're a very lean company here, and we talk about we always look at efficiency. How can we do less? How can we do more in less resource? So these type of things I'm not a big fan of though, as someone here. But but as a leader in the U.S., or I think the U.S. leader is something, or the Western type leader is something that can someone that knows how to woo people. Like when they stand in front, woo something, give them a dream, give them something to cheer upon. I think that's what I've seen that, and I think those also in Japan, those are the same, because those are the same traits of a leader. But in Japan, I think I see a lot of good leadership people. They're very good in expressing themselves in Japanese, obviously. But I think the Japanese language is a very unique language where there are specific words that if you're good at that becomes a very good speech. I don't see that as as a leadership, but it's very well accepted. Yeah.
And if you think about, you mentioned before trying to take the business to the next level, to lead it to the next level. Are there any particular things in Japan that make it difficult as a leader to take things to the next level?
Well, I think there's certain leaders that are good based on the size of the company. Like when you're a startup, getting it off the ground, and then once you get critical mass, I think the next phase is horizontal growth, or organic expansion. I think that's sort of one stage that every successful company in Japan goes through, and those who execute well obviously will be very successful. Our company also did that a few years ago by acquiring companies to grow new business. Um, and most recently, we were acquired as well by another company who wanted to grow their business. So I think those are growth for any company. For us in Japan, uh, our growth here is geographical growth. I think not only Tokyo, outside of Tokyo, and we've expanded with having resource in Osaka as well in Nagoya, and I think the next challenge is okay. So how do we manage these people who are remotely, who you only see once every 3 months or even once a year because so maybe during Christmas parties only. So I think those are um, next things that we have to look at, and then obviously uh, subdividing or delegating the management to sub managers so that um, it can be more dispersed, decision can be done more easier, and as companies grow, then you try to grow new leaders. I think that's really um, not a big, like in foreign gaishikes here. That's not much. I don't see that. I haven't seen that much in my experience. Where I think in Japanese company, there's a track for growth, but not in the gaishike. So I think that's something that would be something we have to look at in the next few years coming. Mm.
What about questions of trust? Japan as a society is really putting a lot of importance on trust. And for leaders to have the trust of their subordinates is very important. How do you build trust with your subordinates?
Trust and rapport, I think, comes side by side, though. I think so. It's not only a one-way street where, okay, you do this for me, then you're good. I think, like you listen. I think not to only complaints, but to what they're trying to do. How they're trying to do it is very important, though, and that's how you really get their trust. And that's why sports events are very good, because with sports event you sort of like, it's a team though, where the end game or the goal is the team's result. So I think sales are very individual animals where they perform and then the results, I think. But obviously the trust that you build between one to one, it's how you communicate, and the two-way traffic for that communication is probably the key. But once you build that, it's rock solid then.
Well, you speak Japanese fluently, so for you to communicate with your team in Japanese means that communication aspect to build the trust is probably that little bit easier. But what about for foreign leaders here who don't speak Japanese in terms of their capacity to get trust from their team? Do you have any advice for them? Trust area?
Yeah, it's definitely just a bit more challenging, because here in our office, the common language we use is in Japanese though. So because 95% of our clients are Japanese, we have foreign customers who are here, but it's all managed out of the US. So we go for the Japanese clients. So as a foreign leader here, I think the Japanese people, when they're communicating in English, I think communication becomes sort of a handicap for them, where the way they express is a bit limited. And the English language is always seemed to be a bit more direct. So, but I think in Japanese, if you're fluent, you can be direct too. So I think it's the presentation, the way you present is very important though. It's not the words that you use. You don't have to use the difficult word. I think the simplicity, the type of word in English, if it's done, can definitely be communicated to somebody who's not as good in English though. If that's the scenario between the manager and the staff. And obviously, learning Japanese takes time. It's easy to say, but it takes time. That's not something I would say that's not the priority, but that's not something that would be immediately happening though. So I think that the communication, the way to communicate the type of words is always very good, and uh, written is always very good because Japanese are very good in reading anyway. You need to give them 1 or 2 days to sink in, but it does sink in.
Why do you need to give them 1 or 2 days to let it sink in?
That's my experience though. When they have questions, it's just 1 or 2 days after then they have the follow-up questions and everything. So it's either it doesn't come immediately to them, or maybe it just gives them time to digest what's been said. Yeah.
So I've asked you a number of questions around the area of leadership. Are there any things I should have asked you which I didn't?
Well, if you ask me, because given I've been in the different locations and I've worked in different environments, if you ask me now, if at my stage if I would want to go where would I want to go if I were given a choice, if I have a magic lamp and I would look at it in a few ways. Where I am right now, at my age, at 52, where I would see myself, Japan is a very good market because it's a huge market. But if I were in a different industry, Singapore would be a great market right now because it's, the financial growth there, the political stability is very good, and it's just, the adaptation of technology is always there. So I think those are how I would look at deciding where I would go. If that's something that I do have a lot of people ask me, so where would you go from now? Yeah.
Any other things that I should have asked you about leadership?
About leadership, okay. If if who I look at as a mentor probably would be a good, a lot of people look at, study a lot of the Jack Welch, Bill Gates type leadership. Obviously, I'm not a book reader to be honest, so I can't say I've read a lot of book. I've read a few pages of your book, so it was given. So I have to make sure. But I've worked with people here where I think they've used certain words, and one of the few words that I like is the word open for discussion. So it's something that I like to use as well because communicate. It's all about communication, and we communicate, and whether it's regarding work or regarding something that's happening in the world right now, I think that's the best way to connect because when you're connecting with staff, but when you're communicating, you're connecting with a person though. I think we have to look through beyond the title because the person is, he or she is the same. We get on trains, we eat, and I think that's the most important thing. And obviously the goal is success for both, not only myself, not only themselves. I think for both. And if you have that will roll up to the company and the customers. So that thing of communicating, being able to discuss openly about things, whether it's good or bad, in the professional manner, obviously, is very important. Yeah.
And if you're going to give some maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice to someone new to Japan, you've been here a long time, you've been an employee here, you've been the boss here, you've worked outside of Japan, you've got many perspectives. They are sent by their companies to Japan, 3-4 years on an assignment. They're about to get on the plane and go. off to Japan, what would you advise them? What would be a couple of things you give them some advice for being successful as a leader in Japan?
I think as any leader in any situation is, there's always a lot of things to learn, and no one person can have all the answers. So it's always very good to pick the brains of other people, learn the experience of other people. And how do you do that is, like if you meet other people, these things brush off, when whether just even, standing in a room, the posture of a person do tell something. I think those are small things that you learn from other people. And I think the best way to grow yourself is to get the good traits of others. That's one. And what I've seen, and I've done it myself too, is you tend as an executive, and sometimes people use the word expat, you tend to stay among yourself, the expat. And it's good, it's fun to be among yourself, but that's a very limited crowd. And I think you have to, look yourself in different stages or different positions or levels. And again, see through the person as a human, so that it's easier to relate or to be related to.
Well, fascinating discussion today, and hearing your history and your background, how you've gone from the Philippines, saw an ad in the newspaper, found an ad on the kiosk at the railway station on the way to your Japanese exams, to wind up running a company in Japan. It's an extraordinary journey. You wouldn't possibly have thought of that back in those days. But that's a credit to you and the success you had. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sharing your story and your ideas on leadership with us.
Thank you.
This has been Japan's Top Business Interviews. We're very happy to have a chance to find out about how to lead in Japan. And Kervin has been excellent in sharing his ideas and experiences with us. And we really appreciate his time today. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.